Hello there and welcome to my guide to painting the Bad Batch from Star Wars Shatterpoint. As you can see, the first thing I did was spray them all black using some matte black spray from Colourforge. Wrecker is also not attached to his base. I started with painting their flight suits, and for that I used some Corvus black. These are all the areas that are basically in between the armour plates. I also painted Omega's sleeves and her trousers as well. For everyone with armour except Echo, I then painted their armour with Eshin Grey. Echo's armour is a lot lighter, so for that I used some Grey Sear. Then everyone was given an all-over wash with some Nuln oil. Once that wash is dry, we're going to move back to the flight suit, and for that we're going to use a 50-50 mix of Corvus Black and Eshin Grey. Then we're going to relayer the armour with some Eshin Grey. Then we're going to start to lighten that grey. This time we're going to use some Mechanicus Standard Grey. Don't paint in the recesses because we want to leave as much shading as possible. After that we're going to start to edge highlight the armour, and for that we're going to use a 50-50 mix of Mechanicus Standard Grey and Dawnstone. Then we'll begin to brighten those edges up with some more Dawnstone. Then we're going to do a 50-50 mix of Dawnstone and Grey Sear just to do the very tips and the corners of the armour. Then we're going to move back to Echo and we're going to relayer his Grey Sear just to neaten up a bit and make it a little bit brighter. Once that's done, we'll do a 50-50 mix of Grey Sear and matte white to start the edge highlighting. For Omega, we're going to use some Wraithbone to paint the majority of her outfit. And for the highlight, we'll do a 50-50 mix of Wraithbone and matte white. Next, we'll use Steelies and Drab to paint all the patches and pouches on Echo. And that'll then be given a wash with some Army Painter Soft Tone. While that dries, I'm going to use some Grey Sear to paint the skull on Tech's chest, which will then be highlighted with some matte white. For the pouches on the others, I'm going to use some Skaven Blight Dinge, which will be highlighted with Storm Vermin Fur. I'm then going to relayer the Steel Legion Drab on Echo, avoiding any of the shading we've just done. And this will get an edge highlight with some Talon Sand. I'm then going to start using the Fist on Red to paint all the red details on the armour, which will be highlighted with Evil Sun's Scarlet, and then finally some Wild Rider Red. Then all the flesh will get painted with some Bugman's Glow, which will then receive a wash with some Reichland Flesh Shade. Once that wash is dried, we're going to move back and use Bugman's Glow to start painting in the details. But before we go any further, we are going to use a little bit of Abaddon Black to start marking in the eyes. Then some matte white for the main body of the eye, before finally going back to Abaddon Black to mark in the pupil. Then we'll do a 50-50 mix of Bugman's Glow and Cadian Flesh Tone to start filling in that flesh and making it a little bit brighter. This will be followed by Cadian Flesh Tone all by itself. Then a 50-50 mix of Cadian Flesh Tone and Kislev Flesh. And then finally Kislev Flesh just by itself. If, like me, yours are helmetless, you'll have to paint the side of Hunter's face black, so we're going to use Corvus Black to paint that in. And this will be highlighted by a 70-30 mix of Corvus Black and matte white. And then finally a 50-50 mix of Corvus Black and matte white. I'm then going to use some Iron Warriors to paint all of the metallics. This is the weapons and a few bits and bobs dotted around on some of the characters. This also includes the two metallic pieces of machinery that Hunter and Tech are using. For Echo, we're going to use some Iron Hands steel to paint the tools that are on his belt. And then all these areas will get washed with Nuln oil. While that dries, I'm going to continue with the faces. However, these are steps you can completely avoid if you wish, and I'm actually going to paint in their eyebrows. If you're going to do this, be very careful, use the smallest brush you can, and just kind of dab it on to try and emulate hairs. To do so, I used Dryad bark, and while I had the Dryad bark out, I also painted Hunter's hair as well. I then went ahead and detailed Wrecker's teeth, and for that I used some Morghast bone, followed by a quick highlight of matte white. I did actually record the first part, but unfortunately all you can see was my knuckles, so I thought I'd skip that. Then we'll move on to Omega's bow, and we're going to paint that with some Retributor armor, which will then get a wash with some Reichland Flesh Shade. The Nuln oil wash should now be dry, so I'm going to use some Iron Hands steel to start highlighting all of the Iron Warrior's metal we just painted. I'm then going to use Uruk Armor Gold to highlight Omega's bow. And then I'm going to use Pink Horror to paint the string. Each end of these will receive a very small wash with some Druchii Violet. I'll then use Xandri Dust to paint Echo and Omega's hair. Those two and Hunter's hair will then get washed with some Agrax Earthshade. Crosshair's hair will get painted with some Grey Seer. And then I'm very carefully going to stipple on some matte white. I'm then going to paint Echo's goggles with some Fire Dragon Bright, followed by a 50-50 mix of Fire Dragon Bright and Flash Gets Yellow. I'm then going to neaten up the screen on Hunter's base with some Abaddon Black. And then I'm going to paint all of the buttons with some Macragge Blue. I'll do a 50-50 mix of Macragge Blue and Hoeth Blue just to give it a quick highlight. And then I'm going to move back to Omega and paint her bowstring with a 50-50 mix of Pink Horror and Matte White. I'm then going to use some matte white to highlight the buttons on Tech's base, and I'm also going to highlight the monitor on Hunter's as well. I'm then going to use some Xandri Dust to highlight Echo's and Omega's hair. Now it's time for the base. I'm going to start with some XV88, and I'm going to paint all the muddy areas with that. I'm also going to paint the wall that Crosshair is sitting behind. I'm then going to use some Tau Light Ochre to highlight all of the stones and to edge highlight any cracks and things, before I move on to the concrete and paint that with some Dawnstone. All of this will get highlighted with some Grey Seer. With Crosshair, I'm going to paint the metallic parts with Iron Hands steel. I'll then neaten up the bases with some Abaddon Black. And then all the bases, including the wall that Crosshair is sitting behind, will get a watered down wash with some Agrax Earthshade. And once that wash is dry, your miniatures will be complete, and don't forget to glue Wrecker to his base. I say it every single time that I paint some Atomic Mass stuff, but these guys are really fun to paint as little one-off projects, and I'm really happy that I picked them up. They didn't take too long to paint at all. They only took about 8 hours in total for the entire group. If you use this guide, I really hope it helped you, and I hope you will consider subscribing for more. And I guess I will see you next time. Goodbye for now.